Hello and welcome to the Outskirts film podcast. My name is Christopher Small and today I'm joined by my regular co-hosts.
Hi, I'm Alonso Aguilar.
Hi, I'm Sofolo.
And today we're also joined by the broader Outskirts editorial team.
Hi everyone, my name is Diego Cepeda.
Hi everyone, my name is Nathan Le Torre.
Hello to everyone, my name is Raymond Schick.
And today we've assembled the Avengers, the whole Outskirts Avengers, to cast a glance back on 2025 and the films of 2025, the new films, as well as the old films, as well as experiences, anecdotes, and so on from the world of film. This was a year where we released a new printed issue of Outskirts, so I think it's suitable on the back of that to discuss this year together and discuss some of our discoveries. So Alonso, why don't you kick us off? What were your two discoveries of 2025 new films?
In my case, was kind of a very much so like a reject modernity year, so I haven't watched like a lot of like the highly praised festival films in much cases. But I think it was also kind of interesting to find some things on the margins, perhaps on the outskirts, if you will, of like the film discourse. And one of those, to me, one of the highlights actually was Steven Konstanski's Deathstalker, which is kind of an homage to 1980s sword and sorcery, like Roger Corman produced B movies, which were also very much inspired by Robert E. Howard and this kind of like pulp, highly stylized, very like macho softcore porn kind of iconography. But in the case of this film specifically, I think it's also interesting what it does to subvert this kind of like hyper masculine tradition. It does away with some of the softcore elements, which I know will disappoint perhaps some of the genre sickos. But it does also perhaps in a more like taking it back to like the traditional family films, which I think is kind of interesting as well. It does play a lot with like a sense of wonder, a kind of like traditional, like almost like Dungeons and Dragons as structure of like a campaign. With the characters as well, but I think the main thing with Konstansky is his like unfiltered passion about like practical effects and like almost like forgotten like artistry and craftsmanship of how he creates like these weird like psychedelic universes he works in. And I think Deathstalker also benefits from having Daniel Bernhardt, standout Swiss stuntman, working in a leading role, which I think he has kind of like that stiff charisma of like 1980s kind of like action movie stars, which he only does like cheesy one-liners and some like expressionistic acting in how he glances and like uses his face in a very like stoic but like expressive way. In a way, it's kind of a throwback to this era of filmmaking, but also I think it stands on its own as alternative to both like mainstream horror film and mainstream genre cinema and also like the festival circuit.
Yeah, it was quite a treat to discover that film in the midst of the Locarno program. You know, it really reminded me of this kind of made for DVD films that I used to get from the supermarket. And it's this kind of strange combination of both very detailed and kind of virtuosic practical effects combined with like sort of indifferently shot dialogue scenes with this like flat, ugly digital. Yeah, it's really something.
Christopher, maybe you can also talk about your pick for 2025 because it's also rather, let's say, mainstream and different than ours.
Yeah, one of the films I wanted to talk about was Danny Boyle's 28 Years Later. Yeah, we're off to a kind of maybe unexpected start for this 2025 by Outskirts. And it's actually kind of also a shock to me to ever be talking about a Danny Boyle film as one of the best films of the year. He's a filmmaker who I think for some time was doing some interesting work. And then in the mid-2000s sort of completely fell off a cliff. So like you can imagine my surprise when this year I went to see the third entry in this quite interesting post-apocalyptic zombie series. Yeah, when I kind of got wind of it, it really seemed like this classic 2020s hodgepodge, like studio cinema where you just, you know, clobber things together just to appeal to as many audiences as possible. And it definitely is that, but it's also a pretty strange digital experiment, I would say. It's really Danny Boyle and his regular cinematographer, Anthony Dodd Mantle, of the Dogma 95 fame, experimenting with all kinds of digital cameras. I think the film was primarily shot on iPhone and features lots of really strange and unusual digital effects sequences, or rather strange digital stagings that feels like pretty much nothing else that I've seen this year.
I cried watching it. Like, it's that's a special level for me. It's an interesting proposition in the mainstream cinema. In the early 2000s and 2010s, it was mostly the bigger the technology, the impressive the technology, we would be more interested in like discovering what's going on. And now it's the alternative formats that gathers the attention of cinephile community. Maybe just bringing that element to the discussion, and if you guys want to jump in and talk about your films that you think have that trend or tendency to use different formats, maybe.
I'm sensing a very specific segue that you're trying to set up there.
No, not at all.
Could there be a film shot on a Sony Ericsson that some people want to talk about?
Raymond?
Yeah, we're talking about Dry Leaf by Alexander Koberidze, third feature film, where he's kind of coming back to his first feature pixel textures. It's funny that this kind of texture and image film itself brought me more to the first cinema and just discovered these disruptions that it creates, because it's absolutely not a perfect image. I remember my own fascination when I was just filming anything and then see a light that penetrates the image and gets distorted or just absolutely change the colors.
You see something and it's so impressive that you want to be inside that image. I don't know if this happens to you, but it's really pure and personal, and it happened to me a lot during watching Dry Leaf. It's an invitation to the exterior world as well, because even though the images are beautiful, I think it's a film about a journey, and when you take that journey, you also want to watch the outside world as well, but at the same time, when you go to the outside world, your vision, your perception is so much different than what film shows you. It also creates that gap between cinematic vision and the reality. So it's an unbridgeable gap between the images and the reality. And maybe that's also what nostalgia relates to here, because you can't access that kind of beauty in real world. Maybe that's a different beauty, but I think that's also that's inaccessible part of those pixelated images were a part of the reason that film touched me a lot. But also I think it's Koberidze's, there's in gentleness and maybe curiosity towards what lies ahead on the road, like to animals, to trees, to river. And this is maybe like a new age bullshit, but we're so human centering in the cinematic visions. And I'm always curious about, like, even it's more like a naive and sentimental gaze, people who try exploring different ways of seeing nature, animals, and that's also something I found in Dry Leaf, and that I still cherish a lot even after months of watching it.
Yeah, maybe following that thread, I've been thinking about this, like, possibilities and labyrinths of imagination and how imagination is produced and manufactured ultimately. I was thinking about two films that really stayed with me in that sense. One of them was The Night is Fading Away by Ramiro Sonsini and Ezequiel Salinas. For me, it really challenges the way we are relating to cinephilia, because it's a film that is that for me it isn't at all like nostalgic, but it's a film filled with the ghost of cinema. Just to say a few things about the film. The film is about projectionist in a film theater that's going that's probably going to close, that has to become the watchman of the the night caretaker of the cinema. So he spent his nights, of course, watching films, but also opening the cinema doors to new friends who have nowhere to sleep, people that live on the streets. So in a sense, they propose cinema as a barricade, also as a ship, also as a secret passageway, also as a safe place, but also as a place of struggle, a place of work. And they're reclaiming a real space that's in Córdoba. That's probably a cinema mecca. That's called the Cineclub Municipal Hugo del Carril, which is very alive and not and very taken care by this whole community of cinephiles, and also of people that are not cinephiles. But to think about cinema not as a place to be like filled with phantasmagoria or to like ghosts, but with actual like ghosts that can converse with the present, and this need to transform the device of cinema as a social place as well, or rethink cinema as a social place, not just as something you watch and talk about, and catapult that device, and so that helps us to imagine, these possible futures as a collective, and also through fiction, this right to fantasize, these fantasies that we have to create for ourselves in order to know how to fight as well.
That's also one of my favorites. It is also, this absolute triumph of classical style at the same time. There are just so many amazing sequences in the kind of subterranean corridors, play with the screen, behind the screen, in front of the screen, inside the cinema space, inside the projection space, inside the room that they sleep in, these underground corridors. It's like this absolutely bravura work of cinematic style. Extra points because throughout the film, I think the film that they watched the most, Inside the Night is Fading Away, is Ruggles of Red Gap, which is my favorite film.
Everything that's been discussed for the past two films leads very well into my choice, which is Tales of the Good Valley by José Luis Guerin. That's his first film since the Academy of Muses, Academia de las Muses, which I adored. A lot of people I know have issues with it for feminist reasons, which I perfectly understand.
I think it was one of the first films that we bonded over because we saw it in Locarno when we met.
Absolutely. And it's a phase of my life, without getting into too much detail, where I was not doing great, and it's a film that is so full of the joy of discussion and of presence and the sheer incongruity of being interested in what you're interested in, which in that case is like 13th century sort of pre-Italian poetry. This is his first feature since then. I won't say it's quite on the same level of achievement, but it's a film that he films basically the inhabitants of a neighborhood in Barcelona that's not very well known, that's sort of on the fringe of Barcelona, on the outskirts. There's very much the feeling of community and there's very much the connection with nature. It's a film about the importance of talking to plants, and basically what he does is he's answering an assignment from the Barcelona municipality to make a film, and he builds from that to create a film with the inhabitants of that neighborhood, and the inhabitants come and talk in front of the camera and they introduce themselves, but then they also imagine what a film should be. And so one of them says, well, if we're making a film about our neighborhood, it should be a Western. I am going to sound cheesy, but Guerin is, I think, one of the greatest humanists in contemporary European cinema. All of his films and what makes them so deeply moving is that they spring from how do you build love for and with the people you're filming.
It's crazy that this film has got such little attention, but it very much felt like not the work of the 10-year return of a master, to be randomly pop up in San Sebastian. First, I felt my anxiety creeping in because the first sequences in the film are very basic, flat, digital, indifferent framing, and this subject matter lends itself sometimes to a bit of credulity, like you're just going to a place and filming people who have difficult lives, who are immigrants, and just taking their stories. It's like there's a lot of red flags there. After about 20 minutes, like you really feel this like Guerine touch come in, and just that like simple ability to like fold a sequence in on itself and to like find an epic quality to an image is like, I mean, that's amazing. That's really the sign of like a titanic artist. The very final image and like the use of the frame there, like it's very, very, very subtle and very, very documentary, but I gasped at that ending, like the frame empties and a character re-enters the frame. That's all I'll say. And it's so good. I mean, it's just like one of those like just soaring moments for me.
Can I add something that really impressed me in that film? One sequence, not sequence, but a gesture, because I think that gesture can also kind of summarize what film is trying to do. There's an Indian family. I think they're they have an Indian descent that cultivate a garden with sugarcane plants, but because of this new project, they have to abandon their house and garden. And then another family picks up the abandoned plants and plants them in their garden to make them grow again. That for me was really meaningful, because even if you abandon something, there's always a community, there's always people around you that will take care of what you left. And that kind of lineage, that kind of connection, I think it's a really subtle thing in the film. There are so many stories told, but that really stayed with me.
Balbonal en sí es una isla que está separada por una vía del tren, ¿no? Por un río y luego por una carretera y puentes.
No quiero que cambien tanto el barrio. A mí me gustaba tal y como era, pero venga, por culpa del tren.
En aquel monte, ahí termina la ciudad.
I això és l'últim espai ecològic que queda a Barcelona ciutat. S'han enamorat d'això. Això ara és com una pubilla. I al ser com una pubilla, se la van apropiar perquè són senyors.
I wonder if I could bring Alonso back in, just because you started with Deathstalker, and I guess you didn't see these films, but what's your other pick? You need to bring the conversation back down.
Yeah, actually, I might struggle with that because actually my other pick might be too high. I don't know if too highbrow. I know there's like some writing about this filmmaker that mentions like Althusser and like materialism and things like that. But actually, I like Bruno Varela's work, which is kind of like an experimental Mexican filmmaker who works with like Super 8 and a lot of like a harsh montage. And like to me, the most interesting thing about his work is how he creates like a kind of like a oral cacophony in his films. And in the last couple of years, he's been working with a lot of like repositioning, like a filmic perspective, like finding like the filmic apparatus and finding new ways. Well, I don't know if new ways would be the way of saying it, but finding like playful ways to like just to showcase it, and in like very like direct miniatures. The one I'm talking about that I saw this year actually is called "Dedonde son los cantantes," which is also kind of like you were talking about the Samsine film and how it like literally made for you, and this one I felt has some elements of that, because the whole like montage is set to like a heavily distorted like extract from Trio Matamoros, which is the legendary Cuban bolero and son cubano trio. Literally the film is kind of like Super 8 footage of La Habana. Perspective is from like literally like a bottle in the middle of the sea, so you get only like glimpses of Cuba if you kind of know where you're set. You also get like radio footage, and it's very disorientating in a way, which I guess is like also like the true line in Varela's work. The previous one he did, which I found also quite interesting, was the one that got me into his work. It's called Transaparencia Estéreo Voodoo, which is one perspective of like a random bird that happens to have like a camera, and it's just like one sequence of that. And besides a meta aspect that I like out his work is like he just like is like terribly prolific, and he just uploads all his films to Vimeo. So it's just seeing like this like very like textured work on like Super 8 millimeters. Like you can see like how much care he has for like the dissonant aspect of it, but also it's just like most people just experience his work like of random uploads on Vimeo. So I think there's also some interesting aspect to how he wants his films to be seen and shown.
It's like a reverse dry leaf.
Oh, this like fetishistic aspect of how it's constructed, but also like fully like democratizing the precarity of the internet in a way. So I think it's very Latin American in that sense.
Fuck yeah. I don't know if I can pull a segue out of that.
I think Limace et l'escargot also has a interesting visual elements.
Also,
No? Was it on digital? But it's a bad digital, kind of.
It's a complete yes. It's digital. Of course, no, because it's a film for me. La Limace et l'escargot. It's a film that's mostly against stiffness in all sense and against stillness. It's a film that everything shakes. It's about two middle 60s people that bump into each other, a man and a woman. They bump into a street and they literally fall, and of course they fall they suddenly fall in love. and it's a film that's that for me it's so fresh, so moving, and it's just like 57 minutes or something like that. So it's in a kind of way it's a B film, it's a cheap melodrama, it's a kind of a Lubitchian comedy, but it's like if a Hollywood director would direct in summer pants or something like that. This little miniature love story like tends a dialogue with other like cheap love stories with great deal of cinematic thinking, like for example The Day I Met You by André Novaes Oliveira from a couple of years ago, or a new film that I also saw in Valdivia that's called La Corazonada, The Heart as Wailing by Diego Soto. There are these tender fictions in a way. There's this little fiction that also play with reality. Anything, like nothing to say but everything to enjoy. To enjoy this company together and to enjoy that time. So maybe ultimately like to imagine nowadays is like to learn new ways of how to say nothing in a sense, or how to invoke nothingness in that way.
Do you sense a change in I'm asking all of you in your taste in films when you get like as you get older, like be more open to more naive, more sentimental stories, but made in a more, let's say, humble and honest way, like not honest but humble way, let's say? Do you sense that?
I mean, well, I don't think I'm the right one to answer that, because I've always been an obsessed with melodrama, so I'm always a softie in that sense. But I used to love more like closed things, and now I'm more open to more open things. I'm looking towards more and more imperfect films than before, because there's this energy that I need. I don't know, it has to do with something musical, it has to do with something of an attitude, that films that are this all so perfect and so detailed and so all like that, for me it's kind of a mistake.
Yeah, I fully concur with that, and that's actually why it shows like a genre/exploitation film and an experimental film, because I guess like those are kind of the two like opposite sides of what I found, which is kind of like middlebrow route, which is kind of like respectability, like the precision, this all like adjectives around like mastery of this monolithic way of doing art, which to me is also kind of like restrictive in a way. And there's some interesting ways that can be played with, but I think as I grow older perhaps, and as I watch more films, just organically seem to be like going more towards the margins in a way, which is kind of like, I don't know, like at times festival structures do feel kind of too mosaistic to me, in a way like as a museum like in a way, which is kind of like these like static objects that kind of like refer to like a certain tradition of how quality art is done. So yeah, I concur with Diego. Like I like these like erratic elements, like films that are kind of like, you can see them go almost like be torn apart by in real time, but that's kind of like the magic of like this like contingency, which I think is very like appealing to me at least.
I both agree with what you say, but I'd also like to counterpoint it with something else, which is that for all the praise on imperfect films and on films that attempt rather than do, I think I also do, and I see less films than I used to. I see a lot less films than I used to 10 years ago, 15 years ago, for example. But I do think it's disappointing that the space for the very ambitious masterworks who then succeed as masterworks. Maybe I'm missing some of those films, but I feel like that space is slightly shrinking, and so again, it's a film that neither Oiku nor I like, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. But the fact that Bigan's resurrection is a failure is disappointing to me. I would have liked it to be a masterwork. I like the exploration, I like the margins, but I also wish every once in a while we had a sort of bona fide sort of, marble giant statue masterwork to just gaze in awe at.
And it can round back into this idea of like to move the medium forward, this idea of rejudice. You have to go back to the more like that primitive side of cinema, to rethink cinema from those rough patches from the past in a way to bring them forward. We have to do cinema in a wrong way again, but that wrong way show us the way, or other ways, in order to create maybe this kind of monument.
La Casa del Alba será sede este miércoles en Radio Reloj. 6. Sostienen conversaciones presidentes de Bolivia
en el camino hacia la soberanía alimentaria.
Producir alevines de tenca blanca. Radio Reloj 6, 5 minutos.
I think maybe I could try to pull off another segue into my second film, which I think maybe draws on some of those currents of discussion. It's After Dreaming by Christine Haroutunian, who is a Armenian-American filmmaker who made this film in Armenia over the last few years. Yeah, the reason that I thought to jump in there was that, to me, it is a monumental film in that sense. It's a film by a first-time filmmaker, someone who's making a feature for the first time. It has that ambition in spades. And I think what's interesting about After Dreaming is, especially if you watch Christine's previous film, World. World is like this short film about a woman who goes back to look after her mother, back to Armenia, and it's like this. It's this very well done, very precise, very knowing in the sense of like the sexuality in the film is very interesting, and so on. It's like a very, very good festival film. What I really like about seeing that film next to After Dreaming is seeing how much she somehow transformed in the process of making a feature film. The great like formal gambit of After Dreaming is basically that the whole film is shot with the lens detached from the camera. The cinematographer was holding the lens in front of the body of the camera and was focusing by turning his hand. So on the screen, you just see this like amazing and very uncanny focus. So it will be a close-up of someone's face and the background will be in focus. But again, not in this sort of like festival way that we're familiar with, but in a very kind of strange and unpredictable, visually unpredictable way. It will just suddenly move, like shift focus, like a kind of organic focus to the corner of an eye and then back to the background. It's very uncertain. And then the film is this odyssey through wartime. So it's about a soldier accompanying a young woman across Armenia during this conflict, flare-ups with Azerbaijan. And you just, like Christine has said, that it's like very much not a war film, but the ways in which it's not a war film are deeply fascinating, because war is like very much on the outskirts, on the peripheries of this film. kind of bleeding into the edges, and you just get this sense of a deeply unstable world. With this film, like what's very special about it to me is that just kind of boundless ambition, which in my opinion she lands. That's that to me is like a very, very it's an extraordinary film, which is also capable of an immense range. And it's also a film that I think, a bit like The Guillotine, hasn't got so much attention. Raymond, what's your second?
Well, it's a bit a tricky choice because it is related to my first watch from the old films. Those are the films by Lana Gogoberidze, Georgian filmmaker. I think she hasn't been mentioned a lot in general in film critic, but in the last years, I think especially the film that I'm going to talk about, Some Interviews on Personal Matters, people are finally noticed her, and she could be placed in this line of women filmmakers from the ex-communist bloc. I think that they share a lot in common, like Marta Mesaros, Vera Khatilova in some sense also. This is a film about a journalist played by Sofiko Chaureli, but at the same time she's a wife in Georgia, which is also talking about these women filmmakers in the 70s. It's full of little details in those relationships. Nothing emerges as a strict and open, direct conflict, but it's all about nuances, which brings me to this feeling of showing the difficulties and the lack of understanding in this societies, but at the same time being in a way compassionate to every person, and to men also in their incapabilities of understanding. This way was my entrance to her films, and the next day I saw her last film. It's a documentary film that she made called Mother and Daughter, or The Night is Never Complete, which is about her mother and her relationship to her mother, who was the first woman filmmaker in Georgia, and one of the first filmmakers in Georgia, actually, who was sent to prisoners' camps, to a concentration camp in the Soviet Union, to Siberia, where she spent 10 years. Glimpses of her memory, mostly out of context, and as the film progresses, we are, as a puzzle, matching these pieces and match them to her present life. Some of the things that we mentioned about also imperfections and this kind of tenderness, just pure tenderness without double thought.
It's interesting you picked that film, because I think the second film that I wanted to talk about was also about a family related documentary, let's say, but in a more maybe sad and heart-wrenching, let's say, way. I watched Rose McAlee's Remake this year in Venice Film Festival, and I was devastated. It's one of the saddest films I ever seen, I guess. For those who already know Rose McAlee and his work, obviously this is also a really autobiographical and, let's say, autobiographical a film in a more general way, because it's also about his family. And Remake is also a kind of extension of this whole project, his whole career, but which had to end at, I think, in 2011 with Photographic Memory, because his son Adrian, that he filmed so much during his career, and especially who I think quoted or cited as co-director in Photographic Memory, passed away in 2016 because of drug overdose. And until Remake, I think he wasn't able to do anything. And this film is basically that kind of looking back to his relationship with Adrian that he filmed throughout his life. And as a kid who has been extensively filmed by their parents, it was a interesting and really depressing experience, because this is a film where a filmmaker starts to question their own gestures or their whole creative process, and how this is something that they build throughout the years can create damages. I think this was something Rose McElwee always like considered as a possibility, but not to this point. He started to analyze his films, his own images, his way of looking, his way of speaking to his son, I think, through this lens. But I don't think it's a judgmental, like a film towards himself on 100%, but it's more about asking questions about images and how they can affect us. And what I like is also that it's not a self-indulgent film. I mean, as a filmmaker, he's always going back to the images he made in the past. So we all have references to the Sherman's March, Time Indefinite, Photographic Memory, all excerpts are used. But the way he shifts the perspective to Adrian, because Adrian, who was always in front of camera in his films, now he starts to explore his own archive, like the images, the videos Adrian shot, because he was also, we learned that, interested in filmmaking. He also uses those footage to like examine and ask himself, like, did I really know my son, or how did I know my son? And I think there's a sweet spot because it's his son. Like, you can't just say my son was basically a no one and he wasn't successful in life. He just can't say that, and no one can say that. But when you see that his loving gaze, but you objectively watch those images, and the way you perceive Adrian as a human being, as a person, as an adult, is slightly different than Rose as a father. And that inevitable distance, that difference between how he sees him and how we inevitably see him, is maybe the saddest part.
And it's interesting also in relation, I think, to this question you asked before about getting older and our taste. I think there's something for me, like, the older I get, the more raw emotion affects me in films, and that like formal prowess in some way becomes less important when in that specific mix. But it's the sheer force of his personality and like the commitment to keep filming through this kind of nightmarish personal troubles that just takes that film to just a truly devastating place.
I'm gonna go on with the family theme, but make it even horribly worse. So I should probably add as a disclaimer that this is a film that was shown in the French competition in FIDE, and that I myself also work for FIDE Marseille, so that's out there. But yeah, the other film that really, really struck me this year was a film called Si Petite by a director called Jacques Meillera. And Jacques Meillera made a film in the early 80s, which I have not been able to find any information about. I have a vague memory of someone saying that Danet liked it, but I really haven't found a trace of that information, so I'd be curious to know more. And then he has made a few films since, and this was the first film of his that I saw. It's going to be hard because every time I've tried to describe this film to someone, I've turned them off watching it. But it's based on a book that is a horrible, horrible story. But an author called Frédéric Boyer that bears the same name. It's called Si Petite, and it's a 9-year-old girl who was killed by her family after having been very violently mistreated for years. And so what is the film? It's black and white, and it's Frédéric Meillera who plays the role of the author, and it's him in black and white writing at a desk while his voiceover reads out the text of the book, and it's that for about an hour and 20 minutes.
Sounds very feed.
Yeah, it's
I mean that as a positive.
I mean it's depending on your taste, it's a positive or negative, but I work there, so it's a positive. And so I watched that film 3 times, and the first time I didn't get into it at all, and the second time I thought, wait, I've missed something, and I let it grow on me, and like, okay, this is, and the third time I saw it in the cinema during FIDE, and I was absolutely overwhelmed. So the very obvious reference point is Mouchette, right? It's a film that is haunted and in constant dialogue with Bresson's Mouchette. But Meillera does something completely different, in that he's deeply Bressonian, but very much not a influence or a family of taste. It's a radically new departure point. There's the question of incarnation, of being on screen but not acting, of reducing certain gestures to being automatic and all of that. But he also intercuts a shot of Murnau's Nosferatu for very obvious illustrative reasons, which I won't spoil, and a shot from Silberberg's Hitler, in which Silberberg films his own daughter, and it's very much about the young girl and the question of evil in the world. Subtle weaving of sort of filmic mythology into something that's very brutally concrete.
Okay, before we wrap up, we have a last part of where we discuss the favorite first viewings of 2025. And Alonso, do you want to start?
Sure. Well, in contemporary film, I spoke about perhaps more with a lowbrow aspect, and then about like avant-garde. So I thought it will be a good way to bring them together in my pick for my favorite discovery of the year, which is the Amero brothers film called Bacchanale. The Amero brothers were kind of like infamous duo of brothers. They're both gay, which is interesting, but they did like straight porn and exploitation films. And they're perhaps better known for the classic film. They're known for the classic film Blonde Ambition, which is kind of like a highly stylized, like 1930s, like Technicolor musical. But it's like a hardcore porn film. But actually, the film I'm talking about is called Bacchanale, and this one is basically kind of like a surreal, like a French impressionist take on like hardcore pornography. So there's some kind of plot which is kind of like a spiritual descent into like kind of like Dante's Inferno. So this like female character that her journey is basically like having all kinds of sex with all kinds of like phantasmagorial entities. But the thing is, like, the film is shot like it was, again, like it's like an Epstein film, and it's like you see like the tinted like film stock and all different kind of like formal mannerisms that you would never expect to be in this kind of film. And also like the film uses a lot of like double exposition and a lot of like, again, like modernist like avant-garde techniques. And again, that all happens in this very erratic narrative that also includes some taboo subjects that perhaps I shouldn't talk about regarding on death and things like that. But yeah, like the film itself to me was quite stunning because it's very formally different to Blonde Ambition, because Blonde Ambition has like more of that like highly stylized, like camp, like colorful, almost like satirical aspect to it. But in Bacchanale, they're like full blown like art house filmmakers, the Amero brothers. So I'm actually kind of like, this kind of has sparked something that I want to like get more into the work. But yeah, Bacchanale, if you like the sound of like avant-garde, like French impressionist, like hardcore 70s film, I think Bacchanale is one of the better discoveries you can have. And also it's kind of like Outskirts related, because Roberta and Michael Finley actually have like appearances in this film. In the credits, they use like other names, but there's kind of the alter egos. So yeah, there's like a whole genealogy that you can create from like Bacchanale.
Okay, Diego,
follow that.
I've been thinking. I don't know what to say, but
better have hardcore in it.
Yeah, exactly. You can't.
But yeah, how? I mean, no one has a card like that, but. Oh, but well, I'll try. If you ever saw that infamous conversation between Jean-Luc Godard and Marcelo Fulz, that's around the internet, there's a guy sitting in the middle of the two of them, and he happens to be a filmmaker, but that somehow he got all his bits of interventions cut out from that conversation. And his name is Francis Candel. And in 1992, he came to the Dominican Republic to make a film with another director called Maria Luisa Santoni, and they made a film called La Fiesta Electoral that's about the covering of how media covers a corrupt election that we had in the 90s. So it's an incredible film, very unknown. We're having him we're inviting him in a couple of days here at the school to talk about that film. He lives in France. I think he's French. But the film, it's an incredible. It's like between Farocchi, but also between Farocchi and Robert Kramer. And there's also a text by Robert Kramer that resonates a lot with this film. It's like, he says that power is the ability to define what's real. And here we see a film that is defining how power defines reality for us.
Good. Raymond.
It's A Miracle Mile by Steve DeJarnett. I don't know if anybody has seen this film. It's one of the weirdest watches that I had probably in my life. It was made in 1988, and Steve DeJarnett is known, I think, mostly as a writer, especially in this century. And this one was his second feature film. It's a bizarre film that starts as a melodramatic love story, beginning of a simple love story with glimpses of dark humor in it, and it converts into an absolute apocalyptic thriller at the end of the world, as everything happens in Los Angeles, and a guy meets girl, and they're about to have a first date, but then a strange incident happens involving a bird, a cigarette, and a nest on the electricity cables. So they miss their first date, and then the protagonist, in his search and trying to reach out to this girl, answers a call at the phone booth. It's basically a soldier that is kept. He's trying to reach out to his father, that tells that there is a nuclear attack that is going to happen in 70 minutes, and the World War III has started. So all of a sudden we're in a total chaotic scenario, but at the same time love story does not disappear, and this double play, double suspense. What will happen to them? Will they find each other, and will they survive, and what will happen, if it will happen or not? The tone variations in this film it's absolutely crazy. For many years, and many studios were trying to make this film, but Steve DeJarnett just was lucky enough and wise enough to get it back after trying it out with one of the majors, and got to make it in his own way with a pretty low budget, at least at the beginning. So I recommend it as a extremely rare, strange, bizarre ride from the end of the 80s.
I see also a soundtrack by Tangerine Dream, which is always a good sign.
I'm going to give a quick shout out to Under the Flag of the Rising Sun by Fukasaku. So Fukasaku is famous for his Yakuza films of the 70s. This is a film about the war crimes of the Japanese army and how the Japanese army hierarchy suppressed its own soldiers. It's I won't go into too much detail, but just watch it. It's a masterwork, and it's the source of much of the anger you see in his Yakuza films. But I really wanted to talk about it a bit more. It's called Beauty Knows No Pain by Elliot Urwitz, and it's a short documentary about the recruiting process for a team of cadets who dance and appear on American television, and they're famous throughout the United States. And it's it's an absolutely astonishing film in that it details the recruiting process and the ideology behind that recruiting process. And it's an extraordinarily harsh what beauty is in American culture, and how it's a standardization of bodies and a negation of bodies, and so that the phrase "beauty knows no pain" is pronounced as, there's a shot of they're on a photo shoot, and one of the girls is standing next to a hedge that has nettles in it, but she just can't move, and she has to go on smiling, and she's being pricked by those nettles, and they tell her like beauty knows no pain. It's a very scary film about the celebrity culture, and it's also a film about fascism, about how like the disciplinary process of going through that recruit, the next year round, the previous year's girls inflict the same sort of humiliations and punishment upon the girls who are this year applying. And all of this in about 20 minutes. It's about 20 minutes long. It's a very, very strong film about, the puritanical relationship to the body, and how it's a hypersexualization but repression of the real body as it's lived through. Only 20 minutes of your time, but very, very, very impressive film.
So, Öykü, you go.
I'm going to recommend one of my favorite first views of this year. It's actually a series of films called Turkish Chronicles, Chronique Turque, by Maurice Pialat, that he shot in 1964. People say that actually this film was made possible thanks to Alain Robbe-Grier's L'Immortel, because he was also shooting that time in Istanbul, and that's how he used the film stock that he didn't use, or used some of the budget that he didn't use. I don't know exactly, but this is what I like about these films. This is basically the most orientalistic vision of Istanbul you can have, but there's this weird charm in these series of films that there are 5 of them, and they're called Bosphorus, Pehlivan. Pehlivan is the most, I think, iconic, because even in Turkey these images were circulating, because from that period we don't have that many of moving images that have like documentary quality other than the studio films that have been shot in that time. So Pehlivan is actually about this special traditional fight that people still do in a city called Edirne. It's in the northwestern region of Turkey, more close to Balkans. So it's really orientalistic. We see these belly dancers and people people fight in wearing these greasy, oily pants and trying to put their hands in each other's pants. That's how they fight, basically. So it's really homoerotic things going on as well, but shot through a very, lyrical, classic way of approaching a city or a culture that you're kind of curious about, but more exoticizing, in an exoticizing way. And there's also Byzance, Golden Horn, Istanbul. These are all like small films that have to talk about Orient and West, East, the connections, everything you can imagine about Istanbul. But all these images are so beautifully shot that you can kind of enjoy the orientalistic, exoticizing gaze. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can't help it. And that's, I think, the tension that I like the most in these images. But the last one, that was another level. It's called Maître Galip, and it's the same title of a poem by Nazım Hikmet. He's a Turkish poet. Like, I don't usually love poems being read within a film, but this little thing is just magic. It's just works in a completely unbelievable way that blow me away. And it's hard to explain, because it's, I think, the combination of words and images that kind of collide in that moment, and you just like, I was basically impressed. And it's, all these films are available on Cinematheque's VOD platform called Henri. So if you guys want to watch there, it's all free, but there are no subtitles. Yeah. So this is my recommendation.
I have one main choice and one special mention just to drop quickly. This year, one of the most amazing films I saw, and a film that kind of restarted my love of films from the Indian subcontinent. But this film, which was restored, I think, I want to get the name right, the Indian Film Heritage Foundation. Sorry if I've got that wrong, which is a foundation that's restoring a lot of Indian films these days. And this is a beautiful, like truly beautiful 4K restoration of Bimal Roy's Dobika Zamin, 2 Acres of Land, which is a Hindi film from 1953. And this is movies. This is cinema for me. Like the good guys are good and suffer a lot, and the bad guys are evil. And it's like, I don't even know where to start with this film, but basically it's about farmers evicted from their land by a comically evil landlord, and they go to the city and just basically everything gets worse. And like all good films, it has, protagonists run over by cars at a random moment in the film, like upending the narrative. It has someone learning to be a rickshaw driver. It's like, honestly, it's probably the best film that I saw all year. And yeah, on a more kind of institutional level, let's say, I wanted to mention Diario di un Maestro by Vittorio Di Setta, which was at some brief moment going to be the film that the third dossier of Outskirts was focused on entirely. Then we realized that this would be commercial suicide, even more than like the kind of commercial suicide that we like to do anyway. Because, and in the end, of course, as you all listeners know, the third issue is devoted to Vittorio Di Setta, who's mainly known for his short poetic documentaries of the 50s. And what we tried to do in that dossier is expand to talk about his whole fractured archipelago of a filmography. And I think from his kind of quote-unquote later years, Diario di un Maestro is like the masterwork, I think it's fair to say. And the reason it would be commercial suicide to devote a magazine to this film is because it's very unavailable, I think it's fair to say, definitely in its full 4-hour version, which I think has been made available and subtitled through the shady corners of the internet by heroes. And yeah, this film, I know that Diego and Nathan were kind of super fans of this film, and also as teachers, particularly, I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but moved by this film's depiction of teaching. I think it's fair to say that it's probably the greatest film about the act of teaching. And so for me, it took me a while to see it because it's long and, whatever. And so I saw it in the first days of January, so it's kind of funny to choose it as the film of the year. But this was the kind of moment when Di Setta really came into focus for me, and this dossier started to kick into high gear. I think what's really special about Diario di un Maestro is how, I should say that it's completely different to any of Di Setta's films he made before and most of them afterwards. And it's this kind of docufiction made with poor students in a Rome elementary school, I think it's fair to say. And Di Setta went there and made this film with the kids, but with a fictional teacher. So it's this amazing blend of fiction and documentary. And like one thing that particularly drew me to it, even though with all the obvious things one could say about it, is how perfectly it fits in with this kind of early 70s wave of gigantic auteur films made in an improvised way that just sprawl over hours and hours and hours and thread between fiction and documentary like nothing ever since. Of course, I'm thinking about, Out One by Jacques Rivette, Petit à Petit by Jean Rouch. I'm recommending this film because obviously it was a personal highlight of the year, but also because you should go out and buy the magazine. I'm not sure where you would see it, but I'm hoping that the people out there will be enterprising.
I'll chip in. There's for the people who can read French, there is a French subtitled DVD in a book that is devoted to that film, published by the independent publisher Édition de l'Arachnéen. So it's a very good book that doesn't have some of the documents we have in Outskirts. So it's, we still managed to find something that they hadn't found, but it's otherwise a very, very good book. That's, if you liked the Outskirts dossier and you can read French, you should also go and buy that book, and you'll have a DVD of the film with it. But of course, Outskirts should be your priority.
Outskirts should definitely be the priority. I had a very nice and unexpected interaction a month ago at a small festival in the Czech Republic, where somebody came to me and was really, really praising the diary of Diario de un Maestro, which is in Outskirts, which is this very long diary of the shooting made by Deathstalker, which at one point we were even wondering whether to cut for space reasons and so on. This person told me that was like mind-blowing to him, which I agree with. So thank you very much, all of you, for this epic conversation. As usual, we are taking letters or questions, which you can send to us at outskirtsfilmmagazine@gmail.com. So for any film mentioned, any text mentioned, will be in the show notes. Also on our Letterboxd HQ page, there will be an official Outskirts Best of the Year list. So keep your eyes peeled for that.